Hello and welcome. Oh, the first comment today, not so much a question. You look half starved and unwell. When people are harming themselves, it's a clear signal they're caught up in a cult. Oh, how exciting. Am I caught up in a cult? I assume you're referring to me, as you say, I look half starved. Well, I can assure you I'm very well supported with food, enough food to keep me going. And after, well, getting on for 2 years now, on the same diet, I'm still alive. And thank you for all your support. I'm still healthy. I've had a successful hernia operation since I've been in Sri Lanka. And you'll be pleased to know, because I've had very many and very kind questions about my teeth. I have now been, as a result of a tooth emergency, been to a dental hospital and had my teeth fixed. So I had one removed, which was the one causing me a lot of pain, and the emergency was one literally broke and left a very sharp piece, jagged edge, that was cutting my tongue and making it impossible for me to eat at all. So I was whisked off to, not far away, 20 kilometres, Ambalagoda, to a hospital there, where the dental surgeon took care of me very well and filed down the offending jagged edge, removed the painful tooth, tapped the others and said they're all okay. For someone who hasn't been to the dentist for over 30 years, not bad at all. So there we go. And my eyes also have received a good recent annual examination, and I've been to see the eye surgeon, who says there is no deterioration there either. Of course, I can't always read your comments, but that's just normal 57 years of age, old age, sickness and death. So have I joined a cult? Well, I think I'll make that the title of this talk. Have I joined a cult? I did speak about cults once before. What is a cult? I think cult is the short and abbreviated word for, really, cultural, but represents something anti-cultural. So taking some people or something out of the social environment and giving them their own mini culture, which is usually run by a figurehead, a person, an individual, often a charismatic sort of person whom has devotees who dedicate themselves to that individual. This is your usual, or our usual, understanding of the nature of a cult. But in that sense, you could call all religions that, couldn't you? You could say that Jesus started a rather big and is currently very healthy cult in Christianity, as did, of course, the Buddha in Buddhism. But they're no longer around being worshipped, or they have devotees to their teachings. But in, obviously, Christianity, there is prayer and worship, but in Buddhism there isn't. And in any environment where Buddhist monks or Buddhist monks live, there is no actual hierarchy. We have an order of seniority in the sense only the number of years we've been in the robes. So even one's attainments in the practice, an Arahant monk of 10 years in the robes would still be junior to a Patujana, so a non-achiever of any enlightened stages, monk who might have 50 vassas in the robes, or even 11 vassas in the robes. So to avoid hierarchy, to avoid leadership, there aren't officially, and in the Vinaya and in the suttas, even abbots, leaders of monasteries. Abbots comes from the idea of Christian monasteries, and that is considered as much in this day and age as just the most senior monk whom has taken upon themselves the responsibilities, administration of running a monastery. Now, personally, this starving, unwell monk before you here, whom I assure you is very well fed and fit and healthy, especially for my years, is under no leader. I have no direct leader here. I'm responsible to my Sangha back in India, the Buddhist Sangha as a whole, in fact, but if I needed any support, they're there to help me. But other than that, they completely leave me alone. In a way, I'm purely autonomous. I'm free to come and go as you please. And in order to support me in this life, I'm so very well looked after by your kindness. Now, this isn't only from even Buddhists, from non-Buddhists, from other faiths and other backgrounds, people whom enjoy listening to these talks maybe, or making comments, discussing aspects of Dharma with me, also support me. So if I wish to go anywhere else, escape, return home to my motherland in the UK, if I wanted to go back to my family home, for instance, my mother, and visit her, I'm free to do so. There are no restrictions. So I know you weren't asking the question, but addressing your comment, your statement, I want to assure you and all of those there that I'm free to fly away wherever I wish if I wanted to. But because I'm so happy in my practice here, in this situation, I hope to remain here for the rest of my days, if that can be possible. But cults are something that I've always found quite interesting from the point of view of those that feel the need to join them and the reasoning behind that, and also those that feel the need to start such organisations and the reasoning behind that. And if you look at the reasoning behind that, it comes back to the basic root defilements of greed, hatred and delusion finding themselves manifest in this need for recognition or fame or approval, both bilaterally, both from the leader of such a cult and his devotees, and those devotees from that leader. So there we go, there's the answer. It is certainly something that's addressed in Buddhism as something we need to eradicate and move very much away from. So this is not a cult. You cannot join. I'd ask nothing of you. And also, what if this is a cult? Is the cult asking of me? I have nothing to offer. Buddhism as a whole, the Sangha, my taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, is actually what supports me in those daily needs. Food, robes, shelter and medicine. Okay. Why and how praying is important, if it is, or even if it is it just a self-hypnosis that relieves oneself of acute pain, gives temporary relief, or is there more to it? This is part one of two questions, and part two I'll have to come back to later because I had to ask the contributor to rephrase it because I wasn't clear as to it. I didn't understand it. Anyway, this one, I'm not sure I understand this. Praying is not important. We don't pray in Buddhism. We don't pray or worship anything. We may practice meditation and we may practice chanting. These are reflections. What you're saying though, and the reason I didn't just reply and say, no, we don't pray, so this is irrelevant, not that I would ever, but it is the fact one could consider the devotional practices that we do. If you see at 6 a.m. live every morning, I do a short puja, which is reflections on the Buddha's teachings, a short sutta chant, lighting candles, incense, a little bit of bowing, some meditation and some blessings. These are mindful ways of reminding ourselves of the refuge we have taken in that Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The Buddha, our teacher, who is long since gone. The Dharma, his teachings, which are very present here and now. The Sangha, which is representative of that lineage of monks and nuns that continues to this day in direct lineage from the time of the Buddha's own disciples, devotees, to this day, transmitting those teachings to us, assisting us and supporting us with that pastoral care as lay practitioners, and also offering us the opportunity as lay practitioners to join them to renounce worldly life and fully dedicate one's life and practice to the practice of sila, keeping moral virtue, samadhi, meditation, and panya, developing wisdom. So this, in a sense, this puja, this chanting and this meditation might and will help, well, probably will help take your mind off any ailments you may have or any suffering you're undergoing, because you're not sitting there dwelling on the suffering you're experiencing. You're reflecting on what the cause of that suffering is. In this case of pain, that you don't want the pain. More, the cause of suffering is there in the fact that you have a pain, is not so much suffering as the fact that you don't want the suffering. Also, through that not wanting of the suffering, you're projecting that suffering out of the present moment into the future on the assumption that pain will continue. And not wanting that to continue, again, adds to the burden of suffering. If you just see this pain as something here in this moment, present here and now, but then draw your attention, your mindfulness, your focus, your conscious awareness to just the meditation object, for instance, the breath, then it takes away the strength of that pain, and in fact often, very often, that pain might be diminished or even disappear. But you're not asking. Prayer literally means request. Pray, will you pass me the salt, one might have said in Old English. Or one offers a prayer in court. It's not a religious prayer, it's a request. This is something that's come from language, but it's asking of another, whereas the Buddha teaches us how we can help ourselves to be free from suffering within this lifetime. Not to worship some god or ask of another to take away that suffering, but for us to address it directly, remove its cause, which is desire, and be free from suffering by our own volition, our own efforts, by following the Noble Eightfold Path. Could you tell us about your journey in meditation? What were the mistakes and what advice helped you in your journey? What practices outside of formal meditation helped you and which didn't, etc.? Well, I think I just spoke about all of that in the last talk, fortunately, because that's quite a long answer to a very good, relatively succinct and precise question, but my answer would be very long. My journey in meditation, not so much a journey, I started practicing meditation. It then took me on a journey, a physical journey, to investigate Buddhism. As soon as I'd established that link with assistance, and then thereafter is all explained in the last video called, I'm not even sure what the title of the last video was, but it was the last Dharma talk. So if you go to playlists, all of these talks are separated. Questions and answers are in one. Dharma talks, where I'm not answering your comments or questions, but just talking, freestyle, if you like, then they're in under the playlist heading of Dharma talks. So the most recent, which was yesterday, is all about my journey, let's say, there to here, where I am now today. Not completely. Go to the page on, what is it? The channel description page. There's a short summarized biography about my life to date there, but it's very brief. What matters, what is important is what I'm doing now. It's what I've even been doing in the last couple of years leading to now has gone, is irrelevant. I'd encourage you perhaps not necessarily even to go back through all the old videos, but to subscribe and continue watching from here on after. And then you're getting up to date examples in relation to your comments and questions of how I'm applying this practice in this particular moment, albeit maybe 24 hours behind the time you're watching the video, as opposed to looking at something I was experiencing some months ago, years ago, because now I've been giving these talks, making these videos for perhaps 2.5 years or 2 years or something like that. There's quite a few of them. But all these questions come up time and time again and will be answered. And you can email me on the email address that is also included on that channel description page for your specific questions. Right. Ask a question regarding mindfulness stroke samadhi. How do we apply on daily activities? Can you tell us 1 or 2 examples of how do we apply the techniques to apply on daily activity? Mindfulness should be something we wake up with and go to sleep with. Now, this is the goal. It's never going to be the case until you have the opportunity to perhaps go on a retreat or stay in an environment which is supportive of that without too much by way of distraction. But if you're always coming back to a place of mindfulness, this is the objective. So we can use, for instance, the breath as a meditation object, which will install the ability to train or have mindfulness, but will train our ability in mindfulness by keeping our focused attention, our conscious awareness on just breathing in and breathing out until we need to think about something else, do something else. But then we can continue to be mindful throughout all of our daily activities by addressing how we are feeling about what it is we're doing, whether we're liking it, whether we're disliking it. If it helps, you could make little labels in your mind, liking, liking, disliking, disliking, or call it desire, desire, aversion, aversion, representing the first of the 5 hindrances in meditation. These are both desire and aversion, wanting or not wanting, because desire can be represented of desire for something we want to have, or desire for something that we have that we don't want present, for instance, a pain. And this can be reflected upon continually throughout all your daily activities. And I often refer to this in all of these talks on a regular basis, so I don't think I have anything that comes to mind as a specific example in my daily activities. But when I was just washing up my bowl, I'm usually trying, as well as watching the breath, to be washing up the bowl with the soap and the lava and feeling the water mindfully, not only to be careful of what I'm doing. We have to treat our alms bowl with the respect it is said in the sutras that we would treat holding the skull of the Buddha itself, with that much respect, with honor, because after all, it is what keeps us alive. It's how we collect our food and from which we eat our food. We take care of it. It's also one of our it's one of our 8 requisites. So we only have 8 possessions in this world, and we have to look after each and every one of those 8 possessions very, very carefully. So it's a very good opportunity, washing up that bowl, to practice mindfulness in that sense, if you want an actual physical example. And you can do the same, washing up your teacup or making a cup of coffee for someone at work. When you're making the cup of coffee, have mindfulness not only about what you're doing, but the kindness behind that action, why you're making them a cup of coffee. Is it because you've been ordered to do so, or is it because you really want to offer them that? Even if it's through aversion and you've been ordered to do so and you'd rather not make that person a cup of coffee, maybe they've been a very horrible boss to you as an employee, or caused you some suffering, try to bring your mind back to positive mind states. So rather than thinking about, what could I do to this coffee to get my own back, think about, let's start afresh in this present moment, and let me have compassion for their ignorance, for having been cruel to me. Let me have loving kindness in the fact that I'm able to practice generosity and give something to that individual, even though they might be my arch enemy in the workplace or in life. Let me have that opportunity to give. This is generosity, a quality you're developing and building up in yourself, along with metta and compassion, right there and then in the coffee cup. So it's much more than making a cup of coffee. This is mindfulness in all of your daily activities. Sati Sampajana. Human biology is what makes humans suffer. Well, not necessarily. It's the mind, I think, that makes is the forerunner of all things, including suffering. You can have a pain, and yes, that is as a result of human biology, but that pain may not bother you. Some people, it may bother them a lot. The same pain, for instance, might not bother you much at all. I had my tooth removed. I did have an injection, but I'm not sure that it had come into effect by the time they pulled the tooth out, and it was extremely painful. But it didn't bother me because it was less than, well, it took a few goes wiggling about and a bit of bruising, but it was only a few breaths, and I knew many years ago, so 30 or 40 years ago, I had my wisdom teeth all removed. And I knew from that experience that each tooth only takes a matter of seconds, less than a minute, to be removed. And this is very, very painful, but really, is it? It's not pain, it doesn't last. Only if you were to project that pain into the future is it something you suffer from. So that is all, yes, human biology. And you could even say that the thinking brain is made up of human biology, and it's that thought process in the thinking brain, that conscious awareness, vijnana, as of the five khandhas, so vijnana consciousness, sense consciousness, coming from what we are seeing, our perception, sanya, and our mental formations, sankhara, creating sense consciousness, vijnana, is too also separate from that which knows that you're experiencing pain right now and then. The mind, not the physical thinking brain, but the mind, that which knows, the citta. That can step aside. You can put a little distance between that knowing, as I had to do on the dentist chair. Put a little distance about that knowing that what was coming next, then what I was experiencing, and then what was to come afterwards. And by putting that little bit of distance, all the noise, the hustle and bustle, like in an aeroplane above a huge city, looking down, it's just pretty lights. But in the traffic jam itself, it's a lot of noise and hustle bustle. That little bit of distance, just in your mind, being the forerunner of all things, takes you out and away from the situation. So no, I have to disagree with that comment. Human biology is not what makes humans suffer. And even in modern science, I think psychiatrists or whatever they're called these days would beg to differ on that also. Does deep samatha necessarily needed before vipassana, such as Pa-Auk tradition versus other that focus on vipassana? According to your opinion, does it really matter which lineage I follow through based on the teaching of their sutra, such as Satipatthana and Abhidharma? So a little bit lost in translation there, but I get the meaning. I'm not familiar at all with the Pa-Auk tradition, so I can't comment on that. But let me just answer this. Samatha means tranquil, peace, a tranquil and peaceful state of mind, not to be confused with samadhi, which is a concentrated, single-pointed, focused mind on a meditation object. Where lineages and traditions differ is in their teachings perhaps of meditation. So in that respect it matters. If you have your own practice of meditation, then, and you're not necessarily talking about ordination, then follow teachers that are able to help you in your meditation. If your meditation isn't deriving any benefit for you, then you might need to shop around a little and find some alternative. But trying to answer your questions specifically, you do need to develop samadhi, single-pointed focus, which will result in, firstly, samatha, a peaceful and tranquil state of mind, and that will lead to vipassana, seeing clearly, through insight, through investigation, but not until you've finished samadhi, you've come out of jhana. Because what you've done, you've trained and you've focused all of the attention and power of your mind on a meditation object to develop jhana, deeply absorbed states of meditation, which then makes it hypersensitive, gives you a heightened sense of awareness to all that's going on around you after you come out of that deep samadhi or even jhana, and be more able to understand the principles of anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and things being out of your control. That is seeing clearly, truly. That is vipassana as I understand it, but going from what the Pali dictionary translate the actual word of vipassana to mean. So whatever your meditation school or lineage or teacher is calling vipassana or describing it as, if you go to a Pali dictionary, find one online, translate the word, I'd suggest use the word for what it means in the Pali dictionary, as opposed to whatever anybody generally refers loosely it applies to. And then you get a better idea of how all these Pali words are so important and come together and have quite separate meanings. For instance, samadhi and samatha, which is usually considered to be the same word, are completely different things. And it's important to understand that, because if somebody is teaching you and they're referring to samatha, they're not referring to samadhi, albeit in the practice one does need to develop all of these characteristics through your practice, generally speaking. This is what the Noble Eightfold Path leads to. Now, as for, in my opinion, does it really matter which lineage you follow based on the teachings of their sutra? So if you say sutra, you're referring to perhaps the Sanskrit language, because it's sutta, double T-A at the end, rather than T-R-A at the end. And I'm not being panitiki and semantics here with letters and words and spellings and languages. There are some quite different teachings in the Mahayana, the northern school traditions, using the Sanskrit language, to that of the southern school traditions, the Theravada traditions, using the Pali language. And one should be clear as to what language you're learning in. If you went to learn physics or chemistry, you wouldn't expect the lecturer to speak to you in two different languages, and even if you understood both languages, for you to easily understand the subject matter. You would expect him to choose at the beginning of the lecture or the lesson one single language and use that consistently throughout. With the only exception, when we're talking about Dharma, we might use that one consistent language by throwing in the odd Pali word occasionally, because it's needed for reference purposes. For instance, if we say anicca, dukkha, anatta, they're so familiar with you by now, if you've been watching this channel, you know what they mean. I'll usually explain their meaning in English, but I would never say their Sanskrit equivalent in their place, because I don't know the background or the understanding of those sutras. So in that respect, the importance is sticking with one tradition, sticking with what's available to you, or moving to what you understand. I found that the Mahayana, because I explored, as I think I said in the last video, I went to India, and my main objective there, of going there, I maybe didn't say this, was to explore all of the traditions, both from the northern school and the southern school, before deciding upon what to practice, how to practice, which teachers to follow. Now, although the Theravada Thai forest tradition was readily available and not far from where I was living, back in England, just less than an hour away, before committing to that lineage for my own practice and learning, I went and researched all of the other options available to me, knowing that I was free to travel and go anywhere else to either just practice or even eventually ordain. There was nothing to stop me doing that. But I still came back to the Theravada tradition, the way of the elders, because it made more sense to me. It worked for me. The practice in itself in the Thai forest tradition works for me. So that's what I've derived benefit from. That's not to say that everybody is the same. And as far as the Satipatthana Sutta and the Abhidharma, I'm not sure I understand why you throw that in at the end, but Satipatthana is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The Abhidharma is a whole 3rd section of the Pali Canon, which is a more in-depth exploration of the workings of the mind and the practice, coming from the suttas, but is commentary on those suttas and an expansion that came later on. And you could say, is it important to know that, to have the Abhidharma as an intellectual resource, or is the Satipatthana Sutta enough? I would say the Satipatthana Sutta is enough. You don't need the Abhidharma as a resource. The Satipatthana Sutta, however, is a very, very brief and condensed version of an entire set of works. But what are we trying to do? Are we trying to be intellectual boffins who can recite all kinds of things, or are we trying to become free from suffering in this lifetime and enlightened? That's up to you. What do you think about the deviant conduct, Mithya Dharma, mentioned in the Chakrawati Silvanada Sutta? Well, that's in the Digha Nikaya. These are the longer discourses of the Buddha. And most of those are, even in the Parinibbana Sutta, which is contained in the Digha Nikaya, there is a lot of, I don't know whether this is the right word, allegory. So, for illustrative purposes, there are a lot of legends and stories and fables and things being explained as a result of by the Buddha in his teachings, but as a result of his knowledge of his past lives and different realms. So I'm not that familiar on any of those suttas other than the ones we need to be familiar with because of that reason. They are pretty much legend, and I prefer to deal with facts. And the Buddha says even himself that what he knows is very small in relation to what he teaches. By his example of the leaves in his hands as opposed to all of the number of leaves on the forest floor and in the forest, is what we need to become enlightened. I'd rather just take from the leaves in his hand. Even if in the Digha Nikaya that is included in the leaves in that hand, I think to some extent the Buddha is excusing us from knowing all of the facts behind different kings living for 84,000 years and so on and so forth in these legendary stories. And also at the very end of that particular sutta, it's very clearly summed up in the simple phrase that this practice is to develop wholesome mind states and reduce unwholesome mind states. Not quite in those words, but if you look it up on Sutta Central and go to the very last paragraph, in different terminology, it's saying to develop the wholesome mind states and reduce unwholesome mind states through all of our good actions of body, speech and mind, refraining from anything towards even bad actions of body, speech and mind, is the path towards eradicating these defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. So one doesn't need to, you're asking what do I think about deviant conduct? Again, Mithya Dharma, as you've put it in brackets, in the Pali language doesn't quite mean that. So this is, again, you're using two Sanskrit and Pali mixed up here. Here in Sri Lanka it's even more confusing. They have Sinhalese, Sanskrit and Pali, even though we get the Pali canon from this very country. And those monks like myself and many others coming from the West's teachings are as a result of what came from here. But here, they have a completely different way of dealing with it, teaching it, understanding it, practicing it, that I have come to understand in the West, and also in Thailand, and also in India, even though the Pali Canon was originally written down and translated within in this country. So, and also Buddhism emanated largely from this country throughout the rest of the world. But culturally, through cultural influence, it's changed dramatically, and language can become quite a difficult barrier when you're trying to discuss Dharma if you use more than one. You're already using your mother tongue and a language. So in Christianity, one might use, if you're a French Catholic, you might speak in French and you use Latin. Or if you're English and you use Latin. But you wouldn't really hear many Christians using English, Latin and Greek, although they would all apply to Christianity. Because if you use English, Latin and Greek, no one is going to know what the hell you're talking about. Whether they speak Latin fluently or Greek fluently, it's too confusing. So just pick one. And then you overcome that obstacle. But I understand your question. You're looking at what do I think about the defilements mentioned in that particular sutta. They're not. They're talking about stealing in that particular sutta, and what is the wrong way to go about discouraging people stealing. But we can make it even more simple and consider the 5 precepts as refraining from taking that which is not yours, being sufficient in our practice. And this long discourse is perhaps just for the pleasure of listening to, put it that way. I'd appreciate your comment back, whomever wrote that comment. If you want to email me, if that was an insufficient, unsatisfactory answer on that point, because I may have misinterpreted. I can always blame my old eyes and the fact that I'm too lazy to bring my reading glasses they're literally by the camera to just here. So please, yes, do email me if you would like me to expand on that, or you would like to expand on that point. As can any of you, if you feel that I've given you a bit of a short answer and not given you the respect you deserve for having formulated your question. Can you please explain how clinging to the pancha khandhas results in dukkha? So the pancha khandhas I've already mentioned, I think today, the 5 khandhas, or the 5 aggregates, so that we can consider to be us, and that's where it causes dukkha, suffering. So the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, are body, rupa, feeling, vedana, sanya, perception, sankhara, mental formations, and vijnana, consciousness. And by consciousness we mean sense consciousness, so consciousness of knowing through the thinking brain all that's coming as a result of those perceptions, those feelings, those perceptions, those mental formations from this physical body, which includes the sense organs of eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, and also the thoughts that might arise, liking and disliking in the thinking brain. All of this, if we're attached to that, clinging to that, thinking that that is what we are. So I used to be this person with so many teeth until a few days ago. Now I have less teeth. I used to have so many fingers. Now I have less fingers. Am I any different? No. That which knows, this body is very different to how it was 30 years ago. Very different to how it was 40 years ago. Probably very different to how it was 10 years ago. For 10 years it's been solely surviving on food that's just been given to me each and every day. And I'm not undernourished. I have been, and I have been told this before, and I'm by no means offended by such comments, because who cares? This body's working, it's healthy, it's all I need in order to practice. But it's certainly, by my own observations and feelings, Vedana, clear to me that it has aged at the age of 57 and doesn't work as well as it used to, and therefore makes meditation sometimes, no, and perhaps not, I can't compare because I wasn't meditating in my 20s, but aspects of this living this life a little bit more difficult than it might have been in my 20s, but very possibly not, because in my 20s I had no control over my mind, whereas now I've developed a certain amount of control over my mind, and that despite the fact of this aging body and its natural ailments, I'm better able and equipped to cope with what is perhaps for most considered austere and harsh conditions to live in by comparison to what I used to live in, or by comparison maybe to what you live in, or you might consider it as luxurious by comparison to how you live. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't make any difference. Only if you're attached to those 5 khandhas, the pancha khandhas, or those 5 aggregates, is it going to cause you suffering, dukkha. So that is the point. That is why we must let go. And the way we do this is understanding that what this experience is of body and thinking brain is not that which knows. And this is most easily representative through feelings, physical feelings, mental emotions, Vedana, giving us that idea of liking or disliking, being happy or being sad. That which knows that we're happy is not happy. That which knows that we're sad is not sad. This is just knowledge, this is knowing, putting that little bit of distance between the two. So I'm kind of really enjoying this, so I hope I don't use up all the questions and have none for tomorrow or the next day. But how important is meditation in Buddhist practice? Can you be a Buddhist without meditation? Oh, you can be a Buddhist without anything. It's just a word. But how important is meditation in Buddhist practice? Quite simply, the Noble Eightfold Path is the practice. And if you are practicing Buddhism, then you are practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So following these 8 steps. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And right concentration is meditation. This can be summarized in 3 words. Sila, moral virtue, which makes up half of that Noble Eightfold Path. Keeping 5 precepts: no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. Samadhi, Sila Samadhi, which is single-pointed focus of attention on concentration on one thing alone, a meditation object like the breath, for as long as you can, sitting still. This is meditation. And then Panya, wisdom, developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind states. So that is actually right view, which is just the first point of the Noble Eightfold Path. Understanding anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, that we are not that self, we're not these 5 khandhas. We are that which knows. That's all. There is no self. There is nothing controllable about this body or this thinking brain. But that which knows is not of this conditioned world, affected and conditioned by it, but not of it. So it can know independently. And with detachment, letting go, can be free of suffering within these conditioned 5 khandhas, pancha khandhas, or 5 aggregates, this thinking brain and this physical body. This can only become and be seen clearly through the practice of meditation, through deep absorption. When you can attain to deep levels of absorption in samadhi and even jhana, then you will see, as I explained earlier, more clearly, vipassana, the true characteristics of existence in your own body and in everything you experience within this conditioned realm. And you will have a deeper and better understanding of the world you have been born into, reborn into, and be able to therefore prevent rebirth in the future. Understanding this is all part of right view and comes from meditation. So that's how important. It's very important. It's at least a third of the practice. If moral virtue is 1/3, meditation is the next third, wisdom is the final third. These are the 3 parts of the Noble Eightfold Path, and all need to be practiced together. But many Buddhists would like to think, and it isn't incorrect to think, that they can practice sila, moral virtue, they can practice developing wisdom, they can practice other good qualities like metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy for others, upekkha, equanimity, and they can also practice dana, generosity, to certainly build those qualities within their own bank and store of karma. Karma just means action, so all of their actions of body, speech and mind which are positive, which are good, will generate motivation, momentum and the direction of their next rebirth. So if they want to be born into the next life, into a good realm, into a human realm, where they have exposure to the Dharma, in case you're wondering what that is, it's the little bouncy birds that like to jump on this roof amongst all the leaves that collect on the roof to eat the insects and the birds. And the reason I don't clean off the leaves that are on the roof are because when it rains, they soften the noise of the rain on this tin porch. And they also add a little bit of protection for when the big monkeys land on the roof, which often occurs and can cause quite a bit of damage. So meditation is very important for all those reasons. But of course, there are people who don't practice meditation. It doesn't mean that they're going to be destined for a bad rebirth. If they're practicing generosity, for instance, going to the temple, offering dana, practicing the devotional practices, researching the suttas, learning the suttas, developing intellectual knowledge and wisdom about Buddhism, this will all be stored up for future rebirth. But if you want to attain to nibbana, no rebirth, and finally freedom from suffering in this lifetime, one has to practice all three parts of the Noble Eightfold Path. And I think on that note, I can leave it there. And you'll see, I don't know whether you can see, the leaves are raining down now from this shuffling birds. And continue with my day as you can yours. And until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.